to Everything's Cleaner in Texas, the show where we spotlight the people, processes, and products that are helping Texas clean freaks fight dirty better. From hospital sterilization teams to cutting-edge technology, from deep cleaning secrets to industry game changers, if it's making Texas fight dirty, we're going to talk about it on this show. My name's Hank Balch, alongside Dusty Glass, and every episode we'll be diving deep with the experts, innovators, and frontline fighters who are setting the gold standard for cleanliness across the Lone Star State. Because in Texas, we don't just fight dirty, we do it big. So grab your boots, buckle up, it's time to get clean. All right, Texas Clean Freaks, we're in studio for Everything's Cleaner in Texas, the podcast of the HSPPA chapter in Houston, Texas. But this show is not just a Houston show. It's not even just a Texas show, even though it is focused on the stories of Texas Clean Freaks. This is a global movement. And with me in studio, as always, is Dusty Glass, Sterile Processing Manager here in the great state of Texas. Dusty, welcome back to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Hank. Glad to be here.
We're talking about on this episode one of my favorite topics. I've got a lot of favorite topics. I think that just happens when you work in sterile processing. Things kind of get in your blood. But this topic in particular is a favorite because of my consulting experience, because I've seen it play out so many times in departments around the state and, of course, around the country. And it's the topic of advocating successfully for your department, but with a little twist. Other folks have talked about how do you advocate, how do you get what you need, how do you justify, and we're going to talk about a lot of that today. But specifically, we're going to address the dynamic of how do you advocate when the data or the surveys or the perception is the department has it all together. In particular, when upper level administrators, let's say like even department managers and maybe your VP of surgical services all the way up to the C-suite, when those folks start thinking, oh man, our sterile processing department is good. Like they may be one of the best out there. Or the data says they're not one of our problem departments. We've got bigger areas to focus on. We got bigger fish to fry. Then it puts that sterile processing leader in a very interesting position. So we're going to talk through how that plays out today practically. And of course, with Dusty, we're going to pick his brain on what has worked in the past to try to peel back that onion a little bit and say, well, yeah, the data may look good or the survey may have went fantastic. That doesn't mean there's still not areas that are really, really important to get support and to get fixed in our departments today. So we want to thank you all for tuning in. As we get started here, Dusty, I guess paint the picture, just a general example of what this actually looks like on the ground floor. Like we may have technicians that are tuning into this saying, I don't really understand, like how could everyone else think the department's doing well? How could Joint Commission think this department is doing well? And there still be some issues that are just not okay. Like what do we mean when we say that, Dusty?
You know, Hank, I think the easiest way, and I think if you've been a technician, if you've been in sterile process, and I think this will ring true to you, and I think you'll realize, oh, wow, this is exactly what they're talking about today. But if you've ever been on the floor of sterile processing department and you see multiple people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, having one person to do 3 or 4 different tasks, you're probably falling into this category here.
And you know that chicken with the head cut off analogy or metaphor is a precursor or maybe a symptom of this burnout that we talk about across our industry. This not just in sterile processing, but I think it is looming large, not only for sterile processing leaders, but also for frontline technicians, because it's not just the leaders or supervisors or lead techs that oftentimes have a lot of different fires to put out and they're running all the million directions. Many times it's our techs that they're assigned to be assembling on the clean side and yet the phone is ringing, or the doorbell is ringing, or there's a turnover that needs to be babied from the OR through decon, through prep and pack, on through assembly, or there's cases that need to be pulled, on and on and on and on and on. And to your point, and we have seen studies that address this through the human factor studies, the more inputs and the more phone calls and the more complexity that's built around this person in this process, the more likely you are to have errors. And of course, errors lead to patient safety risk, and sometimes they lead to patient harm. But then also what we brought up just now at the beginning is you can only sustain as an individual that level of stress and complexity for so long until it actually starts having an impact on you as the professional, as the person. So in your description, Dusty, like you kind of gave us the outline of, hey, if you walk into a department that the data looks good, but everybody else looks crazy, there's probably something deeper going on. Give us some more examples of, what those kind of gaps would look like that wouldn't necessarily show up on a Joint Commission survey, or maybe it would if they caught it, but oftentimes they miss it. Or, maybe it's an issue that the data looks good on paper, and so the report or the benchmarks that your administrators are looking at say, hey, man, like we're number one. But then on the ground floor, you're like, yeah, but not quite.
Yeah. Well, Hank, I think the biggest thing is that if you're a technician, everyone has access or should have access to the simple IFUs for everything you're processing. And if you look at some of these orthopedic trays, you dive into the IFU a little bit, you'll see, oh, these require ultrasonicking. Well, when you're, at these orthopedic clinics or facilities that do a lot of orthopedics, depending on your caseload, it wouldn't be abnormal for you to be dropped with 50 or so trays at a time on top of your normal workload. And so if you do some simple math, even if it's the lowest of maybe a 5-minute ultrasonic, but it could be as high as 15 minutes per tray, that math adds up very, very quickly. And that you tend to then start to see some of those corners be shaved from a processing standpoint of, oh, I'm not following that IFU to the letter. That could roll into robotics. So a lot of places, their sterile processing technicians do all their robotics. Some have other, it's so intense, so labor intensive. They have whole other companies that come in and do that for you, because that system has been advocated for by their leadership. Said, hey, it's been identified as a problem area, but not all facilities get that. I think that having the foresight, even as a technician or a supervisor, or even if you're at manager level, to be able to step back and get those insights, get someone to come in, whether there's companies out there that will come in and do a free survey for you. They'll come in, they'll look at your processes, they'll be able to step back, have that third perspective looking in, rather than a Joint Commission surveyor. They're looking for a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, they got their little checklist.
And they have their checklist that they're looking for, and stuff could get missed that is indeed critical, that maybe even if you had a Joint Commission survey where you got all green lights, there are still critical patient safety things that could get missed. And I think having, I always at least do 2 a year where I have someone else that is, because anytime you're involved in it as a technician or a supervisor or manager, it's hard to see some of the things that are up close. So having that third person to come in and give you an honest perspective of, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this area? I'm seeing some issues here. That arms you and gives you the proper tools to be able to set those meetings up with your CFOs, with your directors, with your supervisor of SPD, with your manager of SPD, whatever that looks like for your structure, to be able to say, hey, well, this person is saying this is an issue. We're not meeting that standard, or or maybe we are, but there's a gold standard. One of the biggest things that I always hear are, places with low temp sterilization, and they end up getting a positive BI, and they have to recall. They don't run a biological on every load, and until this happens, and you get one, and you go, oh wait, what are we supposed to do here? Wait, we have to pull all of the instrumentation until we had a negative. That's all day. That's all the work from yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think until you have that realization of, you go, well, wait a minute. Well, what could we have done to now avoid this? Now you're going to have delays because you have to pull all of this equipment. You're going to have to possibly, these patients have taken time off from work, family has flown in, possibly. Like, you have no idea what all is aligned to get that patient there to have that surgery. So for us to delay it, to cancel it even, is a huge thing. It's critical. You're saying, oh, well, we just had to be able to run a biological on every load, and we wouldn't have had to do that. I think those critical items to be able to examine and say, hey, does this work for us? And we could have prevented all that. I think it's the first step in being able to make honest, critical patient safety decisions for your department.
Yeah, Dusty, I love where you went on a couple of those examples, right? Because you called out the IFU piece, and I want to speak to that here in a moment. I'm not surprised that we got there just a couple minutes into the interview. IFUs, surprise, surprise. But also, you ended your answer talking about that higher standard. And I think that's really important for folks at every level here in the department to hear this, including administrators, that none of us really want to be at the bottom of just good enough. I don't think that's anyone's goal when we wake up and be like, I just want to work, just good, just past acceptable, and then we're going to stop. And in sterile processing, especially like when you look at the Joint Commission surveyors or other accreditation surveyors, what they're telling you is not you're perfect, is not you're as good as you could be, is not you're one of the best in the region or the state. It's you bare minimum. You have done the bare minimum that is acceptable through CMS guidelines, and just good enough is what that, oh, we passed our survey is. And yet administrators kind of treat that as, okay, if you pass this survey, that means there's nothing wrong that's worth my time as an administrator, that's worth my attention, and there's definitely nothing wrong in there that's worth my budget as an administrator to give sterile processing, because now you're good enough. The example, again, that you gave about the low temp sterilizer, I think that's a great example, because even though the industry guidelines don't require every load monitoring in the way that you described, process-wise, patient safety-wise, it's very strong arguments to look at that and say, yeah, but we can do better than just good enough. And that's one example. If you scale that out across how we're testing equipment, how we're staffing, how we're doing instrument quality, it just snowballs from there.
That's just one area. I mean, and then staffing is a whole, you alluded to it, is a whole other. They have databases with every facility loaded up in Vizient. One of the ones I love to use is ODB. You can go in and you can pull up your facility, see where you rank among other facilities. And I always caution places that are the number one, right? The best of the best in this staffing module, especially when you start to see some of these corners being cut, staff members running around doing multiple tasks, things that you're aware of. Hey, we're not following the IFU here to the letter. We're missing some critical soak times here. All of these beautiful robotic items. They love to be soaked for 15 plus minutes and flushed for 15 plus minutes. And, like all of these are critical things to make sure our patients are taken care of. And if I'm seeing staff members not hitting those times, I go directly to my staffing model and I look at that and see where are we? How can I advocate for more staff to be able to get us compliant from that perspective? Because I a lot of the times, from turnover, satisfaction scores, pulse surveys, people surveys, whatever you're using, it's going to come through those surveys, and you're going to be able to solve a lot of those issues. Or even if you're a part of it, right? If you're a staff member speaking out to, does it have to be this difficult? Does it have to be this hard? Are we doing everything that we need to do? So advocating for yourself, I think a lot of the times we're not speaking out as technicians. We're just taking this and saying, this is the job, this is the work, but we're actively knowing that we have that IFU right in front of us. It's right there. And a lot of times when I ask staff members, so, okay, well, how come we didn't follow this, and this? And they're like, well, if I feel like if I did that, I wouldn't be able to get the work done. And I'm like, well, we can't get the work done safely if we don't. And so it starts with that technician advocating for themselves to their leadership to be able to voice those concerns of when you feel like you are not able to give those critical patient safety things.
A couple comments on that advocacy piece that you just described. I think it's important. Kind of, some of this is common sense, but I just want to come out and say it because I've lived it too. I've been that frustrated technician who, all kinds of different things. Like sometimes you don't feel like you have enough people, like you described. Sometimes you feel like you don't have enough equipment or even supplies. Like if you show up to your decontam assignment and you got 2 brushes and you got all kinds of different sizes and lengths and diameters and you're like, this ain't working. I have been in those shoes and I felt that frustration. But what Dusty is describing here in terms of advocating for yourself, what that is not is taking all that frustration to the break room and just kind of airing it all out to each other and being frustrated together in our little cave of a break room. And then everyone getting more and more frustrated, then clocking back in and then finishing the shift. That's not advocating for anything. Okay. I'm not saying you can't talk to each other about frustrations, right? Like I think you can. I think that's good and healthy many times. But if that's all you're doing, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we are advocating for ourselves in that scenario. No, really, we're complaining. What Dusty is saying is advocating beyond our peer level up the chain. Now, what you want to be very careful of and what we want to be sensitive around, even on this show, is, as we encourage this, is we understand that sometimes your supervisor that you would go and advocate to could be part of the problem, or they could not be that equipped to advocate on your behalf as a technician. So you may do everything by the book and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Supervisor, I don't have all the brushes I need. Or I know that we're skipping some of those soaking steps, like Dusty mentioned. And then your supervisor may take that information and do nothing with it, or not even know what to do with it. They may not have the courage to go advocate, again, up the line. They may not have the courage to go to their manager and say, listen, I know we look good on paper. It looks like we've got great staff and great efficiency. We're getting everything caught up by 7 a.m. in the morning. I know everything looks good, but let me tell you, we are cutting some serious corners. That's a hard conversation to have. I'm not lying. Like, I understand. And if you've never done it before, especially if it's been going on like for months or for years in your shift, it can be even harder, for that supervisor to step up and be like, we've got a problem. But in order for this advocacy chain to work properly, you've got to have ownership at all of these levels. The question is, and Dusty, I kind of want to get your feedback on this, as you get up to that manager level or even the director level, and you're correctly advocating up the chain, and then you kind of hit the brick wall, it feels like, to your manager or to your director, and you're like, these guys are not doing anything with the information that I'm bringing them. I'm coming in saying, we don't have enough people. I'm coming in saying the people that we have are not being compliant in the processes, or we don't have enough equipment, whatever. If you hit that brick wall as a technician or as a supervisor, what is your advice? Like, what's the 1, 2, 3 things that they should do next so that this concern doesn't just die on the vine?
If I'm a technician and I've already spoken to my supervisor and I felt like that's fallen on deaf ears, I need to set up a one-on-one with my manager or that next person in the chain. And I need to, I think the biggest thing is that when we talk about advocating for ourselves, it doesn't need to be involved in emotion, and it needs to be fact-based, right? So you need to come armed with my facts, armed with specific examples, documented if you have it, right? Of, hey, this is what we're doing. This is where it is against, here's the IFU. Here's where it's critically against this IFU's process. And having that in writing to be able to point to, rather than I feel like I'm overworked. I feel, because it can be so full of emotion. I've been there. I've been where I feel like I'm doing the work of 3 people. How do I then pivot, formulate this into a positive conversation where my manager can take it and take that information and continue advocating for me, rather than they feel like this is just a complaining employee who just wants to vent frustrations of a workday. Right. So that would be that first step of gather your information, put it together. And I would even find someone that you trust, talk about it and go through it first before you have that initial meeting with that next leadership, and go over what you're going to say. Go over the data, right? Do you have, the IFUs? Do you have, specific examples? And do you have multiple? I like the rule of 3. There's 3 different areas and 3 specific examples I have for you on why my request is valid, right? And come and give that to them.
This is really good information, right? Like, that's golden advice for somebody in the position that we kind of described. And I want to speak real quickly to that manager who may be receiving this, right? And if you've got a technician that doesn't come with what Dusty is saying, that doesn't come with a concrete example, doesn't come with the data, it's really important as a manager, if you want more people to come to advocate for you in the way we're describing, don't shut them down at the door if they don't have the hard data or they don't have the examples. This is your opportunity as a leader to say, what would help me advocate up the chain is to have this information. And many times the technicians, they may not have ever had to pull those data points, or they may not have ever had to document in the way and with the information that you need as a manager to advocate up the chain. So what Dusty is describing here from the tech level is right on the money, absolutely right. But just keep in mind on the leadership side of things that you may have to coach them at first time. So don't shut them down and be like, I don't believe you that we're cutting corners. I don't believe you that, so-and-so or whatever. This is your chance to open up that dialogue and say, okay, you may very well be right that there's some serious compliance issues. I can't do anything just on a gut feeling or just on my perception. Like Dusty said, it's like, I feel this way. I need data. And it'd be great if you're the manager, if you're the director, to say, well, let me help you get that, maybe, because it's not all on the responsibility of the technicians to pull the reports or, to do whatever. Like, you do want to work together, but equipping your technicians with this information that Dusty's laying out, this is the most powerful way to begin this conversation in a way that's actionable, and that we're not just responding to feelings or frustrations. I think that's right on the money. Okay. Sorry, Dusty. I just want to call that out because it's really, really important.
What's great, Hank, is I was I was going to literally lead into that next is that
Okay.
and then from the manager perspective, the majority of your employees are not going to come with that information. They're not going to come with it. And it is our job to empower them and teach them one, that, hey, this is how this process works. And it's a great opportunity to say, how about I round with you during your shift and I want to see this and document that and get that documentation when you're seeing it. So the next time you get 50 loaner trays, let me go ahead and I'll perform some rounding in the department, and we'll go through and do an inspection and see if we are missing critical steps. And that's a great opportunity to give that immediate feedback, show that you are supporting and advocating for that employee and your department. It's so important that because when a technician or even that being a supervisor comes to that next level leader, they don't want to be rejected. They don't want to feel like, that they're not heard. They don't want, they're taking a lot. There's a lot of frustration already built up. So taking it very serious shows them that they may come back when when there is another issue. They'll come back to you, and if you don't, then they're going to say, well, the last time I came, I didn't feel, even if there were actionable things done on the side, they didn't feel that immediate support.
Right. And we get it out there. If you're tuning in, like, we get the reality that not all leaders are created equal. And what we're describing here on this show is what should happen. But we understand that that's not what always happens. That's not how managers respond all the time. That's not how directors respond all the time. We get it. But unless this documentation piece happens that Dusty is describing here, unless you've got the data that you're gathering, even if nothing happens, if you go through this process of documenting and communicating, you're providing coverage to yourself and to your team that, 2 years down the road, when Joint Commission comes or when the next consultant comes and they bust the department for this process, you've now got recorded on a record that you saw this problem, you communicated this problem, you got this. And it's not all about, trying to protect ourselves, but if you just have complained about it before in the break room with your peers, there's no documentation of that. There's no actionable data. And then it's going to feel like this surveyor, this consultant is the first person who has ever seen this. And so there's multiple angles of this. Yes, we want the change to happen, but if it's not going to happen and you've got leaders that are not supportive, at the very least, you want to have this kind of documentation trail behind you that says you saw it, you were concerned, you tried to raise the alarm, and then go from there. So, Dusty, we are almost out of time here, but I want to talk about one more topic here. It's the issue of wanting to be the best department that we can be, and yet somehow getting comfortable with recognizing every single day that we have areas that we can continually improve upon. And then this is the other kind of ditch, not coming to that place where we become the sterile processing technician or the sterile processing manager that's always crying wolf. Not that there's not challenges, but it can be very easy in this role. Like every single day, you can be complaining about something to your C-suite that's an error, that's an issue. And if you do that enough times without actionable data, without progress or process or whatever, that is going to potentially lead your administrators to just be like, it's just too much. Every single day, it's something else. And it can actually push them away from you instead of pulling them towards you to give you more support and more help. How have you, in the past, how have you navigated that balance of, hey, we want to be the best, but we're also not going to just say we accept the status quo because there is always something better to improve?
Yeah, absolutely, Hank. For me, I always use a model of a crawl, walk, and then run. Whatever I want to do, I started at a lower level of this crawl to implement, get buy-in. Then once we're walking, right, that's where my gathering data phase is of like, okay, how is this working? And not only is it working, but is it, this is critical, is it giving me the intended outcome I want? If it is, then I move it to the next phase of run and make it this is going to be our department process. We are getting the effects we want. If it is not, because a lot of things, it sounds really great in a huddle or a meeting, but in actuality, it's not revealing the outcomes we want. Well, that's where we say, you know what? Maybe we need to move to something else to get that outcome we want. And then if it's something that is patient safety or critical, that is, and I already have all the data, that's when I start to escalate that and say, hey, these are the barriers I'm running into, because now my C-suite, my director, my leadership know I've got skin in the game. I've tried, I've done a lot of these processes. Our team has buy-in. They're showing the work rather than the first hurdle you run into. Oh, this isn't working. I need this. Oh, I need this. I need a new sterilizer, a new washer. Well, wait a minute. Are there other options, right? And really using all of your tools. And I think that's where creativity comes in, the buy-in from the staff. A lot of your staff members, technicians, the ones doing the work, they have a lot of really great ideas. Put that out to them. Say, hey, what are we missing here? Could this be as easy as using a red tag, right? If we're dropping the ball on a certain turnover, would it be great if we just red tag that every time? And then that's what we're looking for, rather than, changing the entire tag system for all of your trays that would move to a capital expenditure. I think that it could just be as easy as turning around, asking your frontline staff members, hey, what do you think would work for you? And you're automatically getting that buy-in.
Yeah. Okay, that's terrific advice, Dusty, because that, especially in building credibility with your administrators, they do want to see that you have tried to fix this problem with your current resources and your current process. But the word you used is creative. And we don't use that word enough, I think, at any level of our department, from the frontline staff all the way up to leadership. Like, we don't encourage creative solutions to problems. We are tempted sometimes to want the easy button of, well, let me just buy a whole new, set up X, Y, and Z. Let's just throw money at the problem instead of trying to do the most that we possibly can with our current resources to show, once you're ready to bring that case to the administrators, as you described, then you can have some credibility and say, listen, guys, this is the last step. We've tried everything else. We've documented the different things that have not worked, and now we do seriously need help, and here's the data to prove it. Great conversation today, Dusty. Obviously, we scratched the surface on this topic, but man, such a valuable piece of running departments that go beyond that status quo, that least common denominator that look good on paper, but are actually, when anybody who knows something about sterile processing, when they walk through, you can tell the department, regardless of where they sit on national benchmarks or where they gotten their last Joint Commission approval or whatever. Anybody who knows SPD, you can walk into the department, you can watch them for a little while, and you can say, this department has their stuff together. And that's what we want for departments here in Texas and across the globe. So, Dusty, thanks so much for your time again today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Hank.
All right, that was Dusty Glass. You're listening to Everything's Cleaner in Texas. I want to thank you on behalf of the entire team here and encourage you, if you're not plugged into a chapter here in Texas, to come together to network in person. There's chapters all around the state, in Houston, in Dallas, in San Antonio. There might even be a Central Texas chapter as well. So get out there online, look them up. If you got questions, please reach out to Dusty and myself on how to get plugged in where you're at. And if you don't have a chapter yet, but you still want education around sterile processing topics and themes here in the great state of Texas, you're listening to the right place. And we can't wait to talk to you again soon. right. If you loved today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review, because this fight against bioburden is as big as Texas. If you've got a sterile processing tip, story, or even product that's making it easier for Texas clean freaks to fight dirty, we want to hear about it. Connect with us on social media anywhere you find Beyond Clean. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. Until next time, lasso up those dirty trays and saddle up those sterilizers, because we're about to show the world why everything's cleaner in Texas.